Hi there, my name is Kenneth Wallace from the University of Edinburgh, from the Gene Jury. Today we're talking with Graeme, a law professor from the University of Edinburgh, and we're going to be chatting about the DNA databases that currently exist in the UK and worldwide. So first of all, what kinds of DNA databases exist today?
Well, generally there are three types of database. The first type is used by the police. These are called forensic databases, and these are used to keep information, DNA that's found at crime scenes or taken from people who are suspected of having committed a crime, and to allow the police to help in the detection and prosecution of crime, and it can also help to eliminate people who are innocent who have not committed crimes. And in the United Kingdom we have a national DNA database, which is actually the largest in the world, which was established in 1995 and now contains over 4 million profiles of individuals included on the database. The second type of database that we have are medical research databases. These are run by scientists, and they help scientists to explore the role of DNA and genetics in disease, what makes us ill, and also what makes us better. And the interaction, the interplay between genetics and the world in which we live. Because it's not the case, it's rarely the case that anything that makes us ill is all about our DNA. Most of the time it's something to do with the DNA and the world in which we live. So those are medical research databases. And the third type of DNA database are health databases. These are databases which have been established because something is wrong with us or wrong with one of our family members, and it's held by our doctor to help to understand what's made us ill and what might make us better.
So you mentioned the police are interested in, having a DNA database. So what would that be used for?
A DNA database for police purposes is used to help in the detection and prosecution of crime. And in the United Kingdom we have a national DNA database which is the largest in the world. And one of the reasons why it's the largest in the world is because people go on the DNA database on arrest for a crime. And once they're on the DNA database, they never come off. And that means that even if somebody's never convicted of a crime but have been arrested, then they stay on the DNA database forever. That's not the case in Scotland. Scotland has a separate DNA database, and in those circumstances they can only remain on the DNA database forever if they've actually been convicted of a crime. The exception to that is if they have been arrested for a very serious crime, a very violent crime for example, then it's possible to retain the information for a very long period of time, but it needs a judge's permission to do so. Very recently the United Kingdom had a case against it by what's called the European Court of Human Rights. And the European Court was looking at the national DNA database and asking whether or not it was striking the right balance, and it decided that it was not. And this means now that the UK government has to change the law and consider whether or not it's possible to keep people on the DNA database forever. And one argument is that one way to go is to follow the Scottish approach, which allows time limits to be imposed.
So how in that case would a medical database help people?
Medical databases generally exist to help us as a society understand diseases. So we've got some examples in our country, two examples. There's one called the United Kingdom Biobank, UK Biobank, and this is a project to involve 500,000 people around the country to give samples of blood and to allow access to their medical records to help the scientists understand the interaction, the interplay between genes and environment in diseases. It's not about these individual people, it's about us understanding how disease works. In Scotland, we have a similar project called Generation Scotland, and that's about encouraging families, Scottish families, to become involved, to understand what happens within families in terms of diseases. But again, purpose there is to understand the disease, not necessarily to provide any health benefit for the families or the participants. So most of the time for these medical projects we're trying to create information that will help future generations, not people who exist today. And there are issues about becoming involved in these projects, but the common factor of each of these projects, any of these medical research projects, most of the time, is that people give their consent, their permission to become involved, and they can walk away at any time. But in all cases with these medical research projects, the aim, the purpose, is to create information which will help future generations, not necessarily us today.
So a friend of mine has recently joined the Generation Scotland programme, he thinks that would benefit him. Is that true, or?
Generation Scotland project's about benefiting all of our society and future people. It's not really about benefiting us today. Generation Scotland is there to look at the role played by genetics and the world in which we live in diseases within families. So it might be the case that we'd understand something better about your friend's family and the diseases that might affect them. But really the only way we're going to understand that is by looking at the information across many, many years, and probably won't really understand the results for a long time to come. So it's unlikely that your friend will benefit, but it's still a good thing to become involved, because there is the prospect that will actually help future people.
So we've heard that these big medical databases help the sort of entire population finding genes and for their health. What would happen if I wanted to find out about my own genes and my own future?
Well, obviously you can go to your doctor, but usually you go to your doctor if something's wrong with you. And one of the interesting things about genetics is that they can tell us about what might happen to us in the future. And there are companies now that exist that will carry out tests on your genetic information to try to help you understand what might happen in the future. And that could be very, very valuable. There are some examples of people finding out that they actually have an illness but they don't have any symptoms yet, and because they've had these tests, they found out early and they were able to do something about it. But there are also some risks. One of the risks is the fact that the information that these companies can give you might not make much sense. They might tell you that you have a future risk of a future disease, but there's not much detail there to help you understand what the actual risk will be for you and what it might mean for the way in which you live your life. So for these type of companies, what we need is some form of law to regulate them, to help support patients, to support people who want this help, to understand the information that the tests actually produce. And the problem at the moment is we don't really have that law. So yes, there may be help for them in the future, but they need support, they need to be able to understand.
So what are the issues of finding out about my own medical future? What would these companies offer?
There's lots of companies now that offer services, particularly over the internet. And these are services that range from trying to detect particular diseases to offering information that sort of scans the whole of your genetic information, and also ancestry services trying to sort of find out who your family are. And there can be lots of benefit that come from that. But we have to remember that at the bottom line, these companies are interested in making money. They're not interested in your health, they're not interested necessarily in helping you to understand that information. And therefore, anybody who wants to use these services would have to be very careful. And again, argue it's the role for the law to help to protect people when they get this information or access these services, to make sure that they're not harmed.
So we've talked about these three different areas: for the police, for medical research databases, and for personal genomics. Is it possible to quickly summarize this, or just put it into a few sentences, what we've actually talked about?
Yes, I think that the big message is that DNA information is very, very important, very valuable, but we have to be careful about how we use it. In the criminal context, we have to remember that nobody has ever been convicted on DNA evidence alone. There's always other evidence that needs to be sought. In the medical research context, I think we need to remember that most of the time these projects exist for future generations, and it's not about getting personal benefit for ourselves. And in the individual health context, if we want tests done for us, we have to be aware that sometimes we might get information that we don't want and we don't understand.
So Graeme, it was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.